Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Robert, and you might have noticed, if you're interested, you've been around the internet and YouTube, and there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of heated debate between the religious people and the non-religious, specifically atheists and Christians. Now, I am here today because I want to throw my proverbial scientific, theological hat in the ring, whatever you want to call it, because I have talked about this so much on social media, only with my friends, but I found it was time to make these things public. Now, I will not be addressing everything, but what I do want to say is this. The main objection for belief in God, the Christian God, the God revealed to us in the Bible. The main objection with God is that people think that the God that Christians believe in, or theists, we'll just use theists, the God that theists believe in is like an ancient Greek god, like Zeus or Apollo or Osiris. I mean, you've all heard the argument, we've all heard it before. That the atheists use the argument that, well, that is me referring to myself, you're an atheist with regard to Zeus and Baal and Artemis and Horus and Mithras and Osiris. You're an atheist with regard to all those other gods. Well, we just go one god further and we dismiss the God of the Bible, and they think that's the end of it. But clearly, they've read nothing about ancient Near Eastern gods. Yes, if you want to say I am an atheist with regard to those gods, yes, I am an atheist with regard to those gods. I do not believe those gods exist. Why? Because those gods are what we would call a god of the gaps. That is a god that I can't explain it, therefore God did it. The God of the Bible is no such God. Let me illustrate this a bit clearer, hopefully. I think it was Werner Jägel, or I think I pronounced his name correctly, who said that the big difference is this, and we need to get this. The difference is this. The gods of the ancient Near East, all of them, descended from the heavens and the earth. They were products of the primeval chaos, mass energy, whatever you want to call it. The God of the Bible created the heavens and the earth. He doesn't fit into that category at all. It's not even possible to put them in the same category. So, to sum it up, the God of the Bible is not a God of the gaps, he is the God of the whole show. The God of the bits we do understand, and the God of the bit we don't, and the God of the bits we don't understand. He is not some kind of placeholder until science comes up with an answer. For example, Stephen Hawking, if many of you are familiar with him, says that because there's a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Now, apart from the triple self-contradiction, that's saying that because there is a law such as gravity, that is saying there is something, the universe will create itself from nothing, that's a contradiction. Secondly, because there is a law of gravity, he doesn't even say because gravity exists. So there's contradiction number 2. Secondly, the universe will create itself. If I say X creates Y, what do I mean? I mean that I presuppose the existence of X in order to explain the existence of Y. But if I say X creates X, what do I mean? I mean that I presuppose the existence of X in order to bring X into existence. This is obviously self-contradictory and so logically incoherent, even if we put X equal to the universe. So there's a triple self-contradiction on Hawking's part. But Hawking, just like many other of the self-proclaimed new atheists like Richard Dawkins and the late Christopher Hitchens, say that you've got to choose between God and science. You, as the general public, have to choose between God and science. I want to tell you, in the simplest way I can, that is not the case. Okay, let's rewind a couple centuries to the late 1600s. Many of you, I would hope, may be familiar with Sir Isaac Newton. Brilliant man, absolute genius. Was one of the greatest physicists of all time, and the man considered to be the founder of modern science. Newton, like Hawking, studied the law of gravity, so they studied the same thing. Newton said that because there's a law such as gravity, I can write a 500-page or so book, the Principia Mathematica, explain the genius of the God that did it that way. Stephen Hawking says you've got to choose between God and science. So it seems to me that we've come to a great reversal. Now, why has that happened? Newton used the law of gravity to believe in God. Hawking uses it as an excuse for denying the existence of God. So, where have we gone wrong in the past couple centuries? Obviously, a lot can happen in just a few centuries, but where have we gone from here? What happened? I'm going to suggest two things. First of all, that this has happened because of an inadequate view of science and an inadequate view of God. First of all, an inadequate view of science. Well, actually, let's start with God first, because that's what we've been talking about. Okay, so an inadequate view of God. This is what I've been saying when people accuse me, well, not even me personally, but accuse theists of believing in a sort of God of the gaps. The simple fact is that God is not a God of the gaps, he's God of the whole show. And it even ties in when I ask people, when people are asked, do you believe in God? And they say, what God? That just makes my hair stand on end, that we are in the 21st century, and when we ask somebody if they believe in God, we have to explain to them what God. That makes my hair stand on end. It is frightening that we have to explain it to people. But that's what I mean about inadequate view of God. A God of the gaps. A God that I can't explain it, therefore God did it. The simple fact is that the God of the Bible is not a God of the gaps. He's God of the whole show. So that is my point about the God of the gaps. Moving on. An inadequate view of science. What I mean by that is, and I am not a scientist, okay? I am not a scientist, so don't take my word for it. I don't want you to. Go look it up yourselves and see what you can find. But what I mean by an inadequate view of science is, I suppose the best way to illustrate it, at least hypothetically speaking, is to refer to, I want to use an argument used by a brilliant scientist, in my mind, a brilliant scientist, Dr. John Lennox. He is a mathematician and a philosopher of science of Oxford University. And he has written many books, including a book called God and Stephen Hawking, responding to Hawking's book, The Grand Design. That's what the book was written for, as a response to Hawking's book. He did a lecture on it called God and Stephen Hawking, or something like that. It's about 22 minutes long on YouTube. And about 8 or 10 minutes so in, he says, a supernatural being is an agent who does something, and in the case of the God of the Bible, he is a personal agent. Dismissing such agency, Hawking ascribes creative power to physical law. But physical law is not an agent. And then he says, this is a category mistake. He is confusing two entirely different kinds of entity, physical law and personal agency, so that the choice that he offers us before is between false alternatives. Back to what I was saying. Hawking is confusing two different kinds of entity, physical law and personal agency. This is what I meant by an inadequate view of science. Because you have what Hawking is doing is presenting the general public with a model, aka the universe. He's presenting the public with the universe, and he's saying you have two choices, either the laws of physics or gravity or God. That would be like me standing in front of you with a motor car engine and saying that here's this motor car engine and you have two options, either the laws of physics or and engineering or Henry Ford. Please choose. You would say you're being ridiculous. You need both. Do you? Again, this is what I meant by inadequate view of science. Or maybe some of you aren't into cars. Maybe some of you are into aerial travel or jets or planes. So say I'm standing in front of you guys with a jet engine and saying you have two options to explain this jet engine. The laws of physics and engineering or Sir Frank Whittle. Please choose. And again, you would say you're being completely absurd. You need both to explain them. Again, do you? And this is where we really have to start thinking about it. Let's think. You have two explanations. You have the laws of physics and engineering. Let's take the motor car engine. You have the laws of physics and engineering, and you have Henry Ford. Two explanations. One in terms of law and mechanism, and the other in terms of agency. Law and mechanism and agency. And please notice, this is what I would like to stress. Please notice that they do not compete with one another. They do not conflict. They complement one another. It's the same thing, I would argue, with the universe. God is an explanation for the existence of the universe. The laws of nature and physics and chemistry and biology and mathematics and everything are explanations of how it works, and you need both to explain it fully. Let me go back for a moment to what I said about physical law. Everyone I run into, mostly, wants to give physical law this creative power, as if laws could create something. And going back to what John Lennox was saying about confusing two different entities, physical law and personal agency. So the choice he gives us is between false alternatives. And then he says, matter may be humble stuff, but it is not produced by laws. And one of John Lennox's colleagues at Oxford, Peter Atkins, who's a chemist and an atheist, they debated together some years ago, and afterwards Lennox asked Atkins, what do you think created the universe? Or I think it was during the debate, whatever. Lennox asked Atkins, what do you think created the universe? And he said, mathematics and the laws of nature. And Lennox started to laugh, actually. He didn't mean to, but he couldn't help himself. And Atkins said to him, well, John, why are you laughing? And he said to him, well, Peter, I'm sorry, but I'm a mathematician, and quite frankly, that's the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my life. As if the laws of mathematics could create the as if mathematics could create the universe. The laws of mathematics can create they can't create anything. You know, people used to think that you could create money by arithmetics. That's where the analogy with. Actually, no, I don't think I've brought in that analogy. Okay, so I apologize for the fly. So my next point. Well, I've already mentioned it. I might as well go into it. The argument also comes up, and by the way, I hope I've touched on the inadequate view of science, where law and mechanism and agency don't conflict, they don't compete, they complement, and more often than not, you need both to explain something fully. I can't remember who it was, but somebody once said that I do not deny that science explains, but I postulate God to explain why science explains. So let's lay that to rest now. So we've talked about an inadequate view of God and an inadequate view of science. So we talked about those two things. Now moving on. Another thing that comes up is the idea of miracles. That any self-respecting intellect can't possibly be expected to believe in the resurrection, or to believe in miracles, or to believe, if you take Genesis literally, a talking snake, or that God created the universe in 6 days. I don't take Genesis literally, okay? I don't take it literally. I don't think it actually happened in 6 little 24-hour days, okay? I don't take it literally, but some people do, but I don't. So, they say any self-respecting intellect can't possibly be expected to believe in the virgin birth, the conception, or the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Any self-respecting intellect would have to reject such a thing, because after all, I mean, David Hume proved long ago that miracles are violations of the laws of nature. Are they? They are no such thing. Hume was actually wrong on so many levels. Miracles are not violations of the laws of nature. I'll explain why. And this is where the analogy I was talking about. I'm going to use John Lennox again, because he's a great scientist. If you'll count pure mathematics as science, but that's another story. So, you have the analogy with miracles and if they are violations of the laws of nature. Here's an analogy that might help. Say I go to bed and I leave $20 in my desk drawer. Okay? I wake up the next morning and there's still $20 there. I go to bed the next night and I put another $20 in my desk drawer. I wake up the next morning and I find that there's only $10 in my desk drawer. Now, do I say that the laws of arithmetic have been broken or the laws of Canada have been broken? Well, I would hope that anyone would be able to say that the laws of Canada have been broken. Why? Because you know the laws of arithmetic. You know that desk drawer is not a closed system of cause and effect, that a thief could have put their hand into the drawer and taken the money, because you know that desk drawer is not a closed system of cause and effect. It's the same with the universe. Now, however, this is where the controversy starts, because if you are a naturalist, if you are a materialist, if you believe that this universe is all that exists, and there is no transcendence, there is no God, then that desk drawer has to be a closed system of cause and effect, by definition. So that desk drawer has to be a closed system of cause and effect if you are a materialist or a naturalist. If you're not, however, then it is quite possible that desk drawer is not a closed system of cause and effect. So really, the materialist or the naturalist, in this analogy, or even with regards to the universe, the materialist is stuck. They have no way of explaining it, because that desk drawer, to them, is a closed system of cause and effect, and it must be by definition. This is what I'm talking about. To the person who believes in God, the theist, who says that this universe is not all that exists, that there is a transcendence, there is a God. This universe is not a closed system of cause and effect. And so, therefore, miracles are possible. In fact, let's take the resurrection, for example. If we didn't have laws of nature, or regularities as they're called, if we didn't have the laws of nature, we wouldn't recognize a miracle if it was standing right in our face. For example, the resurrection. If we didn't know, if people back then didn't know that dead people don't usually get up and start walking after they've died, days after they've died, and they didn't know that, then no one would have been surprised to see Jesus risen from the dead. Or even today, the 21st century, we're in the year 2016, if we didn't know that dead people don't usually stay dead, and people started popping up all over the place, we wouldn't care anything of it. But because we know the law of nature that dead people stay dead, because we know the regularity, we recognize something spectacular as the resurrection. Even if it happened 2,000 years ago, we recognize that as something spectacular. In fact, the very definition of a miracle is something to be wondered at. So because we know the regularity, we can recognize something as a special occurrence. It's the same thing with the virgin birth, the virgin conception. Because when Mary told Joseph that she was pregnant, what did he want to do? He wanted to divorce her. Why? Because he knew the laws of nature. He knew the regularity. He knew exactly where babies came from. I mean, and he knew exactly where babies came from. He wasn't some first century, I don't know, he wasn't some first century idiot who didn't know where babies came from. He knew exactly where babies came from. And so therefore it took a lot of convincing for him to welcome this woman, for him to accept her as his wife. And what do you know, months later the baby is born. So he knew the regularity. It would have needed immense convincing for him to take this woman in. So, because we know the regularities, we can recognize something as a miracle. For the materialist or the naturalist, however, this universe is a closed system of cause and effect by definition. The theist, on the other hand, like I mentioned, this universe is not necessarily a closed system of cause and effect. Or even for the agnostic, someone who's on the fence, this universe doesn't have to be a closed system of cause and effect. It can go either way. So the atheist or the naturalist or the materialist, there's very difference between them. The naturalist is in fact confined to their own philosophy. They're confined. So if they believe that this universe is all that exists. They are in fact confined regardless of the evidence. And if empirical evidence starts to suggest that there might be something more to the whole picture, then they've got to give up on the basis of their philosophy, but not their science. Which brings me to my final point. We can talk about scientific evidence all we want, but really, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is a worldview. And this is another thing I would like to stress. There is no difference between atheists and theists when it comes to science. Our science is not what divides us. And all you have to do is look at the Nobel Prize winners. Roughly speaking, from the year 1900 to 2000, over 65% of Nobel Prize winners have believed in God. So it's obvious to see that our science is not what divides us. What divides us is our worldview. Atheism and theism. And there are scientists, even at the Nobel Prize level, on both sides. So, that brings me to my conclusion. This video is already 21 minutes long. I apologize. If you have gotten to the end of this video, God bless you. And I hope that I have explained my ideas clearly. If not, please comment below if there is something that I would need to explain more. So, what we really talked about was the God of the Gaps. We really talked about three things. We talked about an inadequate view of God, an inadequate view of science, and miracles. That this universe may not be a closed system of cause and effect. And that the naturalist or the materialist is in fact confined to their own philosophy. So, again, I hope you have enjoyed this. If you would be so gracious, leave a like down below, comment if I didn't explain something quite clearly, and if you would like me to explain something else that I haven't discussed, please also comment what you would like me to explain, and I will see what I can do about it. Everyone, have a nice day, and God bless you all.